This is Mr. B reads J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and we're going to start with the incredible work of The Fellowship of the Ring, arguably one of the best books ever written. This story series is aimed at our older children in years 4, 5 and 6, and we're going to enjoy listening with it to the incredible soundtrack from the films, the music of Howard Shore. So sit back and enjoy the wonderful work and music of Lord of the Rings.
J.R.R. Tolkien's The Fellowship of the Ring, Chapter 4, A Shortcut to Mushrooms. In the morning, Frodo woke refreshed. He was lying in a bower made by a living tree, with branches laced and drooping to the ground. His bed was of fern and grass, deep and soft and strangely fragrant. The sun was shining through the fluttering leaves, which were still green upon the tree. He jumped up and went out. Sam was sitting on the grass near the edge of the wood. Pippin was standing, studying the sky and the weather. "Come and have your breakfast," Pippin said. "The bread tastes so good, I didn't want to leave you any, but Sam insisted." Frodo sat down beside Sam and began to eat. "What is the plan for today?" asked Pippin. "To walk to Bucklebury as quickly as possible," answered Frodo, and gave his attention to the food. "Do you think we'll see anything of those riders?" asked Pippin cheerfully. Under the morning sun, the prospect of seeing a whole troop of them did not seem very alarming to him. "Yes, probably," said Frodo, not liking the reminder, "but I hope to get across the river without their seeing us." Frodo finished his breakfast in silence. Then, standing up, he began looking over the land ahead and called to Pippin. "All ready to start," he said, as Pippin ran up. "We must be getting off at once. We slept late, and there are a good many miles to go." "You slept late, you mean," Pippin said. "I was up long before, and we are only waiting for you to finish eating and thinking." "I have finished both now, and I am going to make for Bucklebury Ferry as quickly as possible. I am not going back to the road we left last night. I am going to cut straight across country from here." "Then you are going to fly," said Pippin. "You won't cut straight on foot across anywhere in this country." "We can cut straighter than the road anyway," answered Frodo. "The ferry is east from Woodhall, but the hard road curves away to the left. You can see a bend of it away north over there. It goes round the north end of the marsh so as to strike the causeway from the bridge above Stock, but that is miles out of the way. We could save a quarter of the distance if we made a straight line for the ferry from where we stand." "Shortcuts make long delays," argued Pippin. "The country is rough around here, and there are bogs and all kinds of difficulties down in the marsh. I know the land in these parts, and if you're worrying about black riders, I can't see that it is any worse meeting them on a road than in a wood or a field." "It is less easy to find people in the woods and fields," answered Frodo, "and if you are supposed to be on the road, there is some chance that you will be looked for on the road, and not off it." "All right," said Pippin. "I will follow you into every bog and ditch, but it will be hard. I had counted on passing the Golden Perch at Stock before sundown, the best beer in the East Farthing, or used to be. It's a long time since I tasted it." "That settles it," said Frodo. "Shortcuts make delays, but inns make longer ones. At all costs, we must keep you away from the Golden Perch. We want to get to Bucklebury before dark. What do you say, Sam?" I'll go along with you, Mr. Frodo," said Sam, in spite of private misgivings and a deep regret for the best beer in the East Farthing. "Then, if we're going to toil through bog and briar, let's get going," said Pippin. It was already nearly as hot as it had been the day before, but clouds were beginning to come up from the west. It looked likely to turn to rain. The hobbits scrambled down a deep green bank and plunged into the thick trees below. Their course had been chosen to leave Woodhall to their left, and to cut slanting through the trees that clustered along the eastern side of the hills until they reached the flats beyond. Then they could make straight for the ferry over country that was open, except for a few ditches and fences. Frodo reckoned they had 18 miles to go in a straight line. He soon found that the thicket was closer and more tangled than it had appeared. There were no paths in the undergrowth, and they did not get on very fast. When they had struggled to the bottom of the bank, they found a stream running down the hills behind a deeply dug bed, with steep, slippery sides overhung with brambles. Most inconveniently, it cut across the line they had chosen. They couldn't jump over it, nor indeed get across it at all without getting wet, scratched and muddy. They halted, wondering what to do. "First check," said Pippin, smiling grimly. Sam Gamgee looked back. Through an opening in the trees he caught a glimpse of the top of the green bank from which they had climbed down. "Look," he said, clutching Frodo by the arm. They all looked, and on the edge, high above them, they saw against the sky a horse standing. Behind it stooped a black figure. They at once gave up any idea of going back. Frodo led the way and plunged quickly into the thick bushes behind the stream. "Phew," he said to Pippin, "we're both right. The shortcut has gone crooked already, but we got under cover just in time. You've got sharp ears, Sam. Can you hear anything else?" They stood still, almost holding their breath as they listened, but there was no sound of pursuit. "I don't fancy he would try bringing his horse down that bank," said Sam, "but I guess he knows we came down it." We had better be getting on. Going on was not altogether easy. They had packs to carry, and the bushes and brambles were reluctant to let them through. They were cut off from the wind by the ridge behind, and the air was still and stuffy. When they forced their way at last into more open ground, they were hot and tired and very scratched, and they were also no longer certain of the direction in which they were going. The banks of the stream sank as it reached the levels and became broader and shallower, wandering off towards the marsh and the river. "Why, this is the Stock Brook," said Pippin. "If we are going to try and get back onto our course, we must cross at once and bear right." They waded the stream and hurried over a wide open space, rush-grown and treeless on the further side. Beyond that they came to a belt of trees, tall oaks for the most part, with here and there an elm tree or an ash. The ground was fairly level, and there was little undergrowth, but the trees were too close for them to see far ahead. The leaves blew upwards in sudden gusts of wind, and spots of rain began to fall from the overcast sky. Then the wind died away, and the rain came streaming down. They trudged along as fast as they could over patches of grass and through thick drifts of old leaves, and all about them the rain pattered and trickled. They did not talk, but kept glancing back and from side to side, looking out for any sign of the black riders. After half an hour, Pippin said, "I hope we've not turned too much towards the south, and are not walking longwise through this wood. It is not a very broad belt. I should have said no more than a mile at the widest. We ought to have been through it by now." "It's no good our starting to go in zigzags," said Frodo. "That won't mend matters. Let us keep on as we're going. I'm not sure that I want to come out into the open yet." They went on for perhaps another couple of miles. Then the sun gleamed out of ragged clouds again, and the rain lessened. It was now past midday, and they felt as if it was time for lunch. They halted under an elm tree. Its leaves, though fast turning yellow, were still thick, and the ground at its feet was fairly dry and sheltered. They started eating and drinking, and making their way carefully through their provisions. Very soon they were laughing and snapping their fingers at the rain and at black riders. The last few miles they felt would soon be behind them. Frodo propped his back against the tree trunk and closed his eyes. Sam and Pippin sat near, and they began to hum, and then to sing softly. "Ho, ho, ho, to the bottle I go, to heal my heart and drown my woe. Rain may fall and wind may blow, and many miles be still to go, but under a tall tree I will lie, and let the clouds go sailing by." "Ho, ho, ho," they began again louder. They stopped short suddenly. Frodo sprang to his feet. A long-drawn wail came down the wind like the cry of some evil and lonely creature. It rose and fell, and ended on a high, piercing note. Even as they sat and stood, as if suddenly frozen, it was answered by another cry, fainter and further off, but no less chilling to the blood. There was then a silence broken only by the sound of the wind in the leaves. "And what do you think that was?" Pippin asked at last, trying to speak lightly, but his voice quavering. "If it was a bird, it was one that I have never heard in the Shire before." "It was not bird or beast," said Frodo. "It was a call or a signal. There were words in that cry, though I could not catch them, but no hobbit has such a voice." No more was said about it. They were all thinking of the riders, but no one spoke of them. They were now reluctant either to stay or to go, but sooner or later they had to get across the open country to the ferry, and it was best to go sooner and in daylight. In a few moments they had shouldered their packs and were off again. Before long the wood came to a sudden end. Wide grasslands stretched before them. They now saw that they had in fact turned too much to the south. Away above the flats they could glimpse the low hill of Buckleberry across the river, but it was now to their left. Creeping cautiously out from the edge of the trees, they set off across the open as quickly as they could. At first they felt afraid, away from the shelter of the wood. Far back behind them stood the high place where they had breakfasted. Frodo half expected to see the small distant figure of a horseman on the ridge against the sky, but there was no sign of one. The sun escaping from the breaking clouds as it sank towards the hills they had left was now shining brightly again. Their fear left them, although they still felt uneasy, but the land became steadily more tame and well ordered. Soon they came into well-tended fields and meadows. There were hedges and gates and dikes for drainage. Everything seemed quiet and peaceful, just an ordinary corner of the Shire. Their spirits rose with every step. The line of the river grew nearer, and the black riders began to seem like phantoms of the woods, now left far behind. It was a further 5 miles before they finally approached Ferry Lane on the edge of Buckland. By now they were bedraggled and exhausted. As the day grew increasingly cold, the hobbits wrapped themselves up, but their ears strained for any sound of pursuing riders. They reached the entrance to the Ferry Lane at last. It was marked by 2 tall white posts that suddenly loomed up on their right. Sam led the way. They were just beginning to follow when they heard the sound that they had all been dreading. Hooves on the road ahead. The sound was coming towards them. Sam jumped forward and peered into the gloom. Clip clop, came the approaching rider. The fall of the hooves sounded loud in the still, foggy air. "You'd better be hidden, Mr. Frodo," said Sam anxiously. "You get down and cover up. Pippin and I will send this rider on its way." He stepped forward, ready to meet the rider in his path. Black riders would have to ride over him to get anywhere near Frodo. Clip-clop, clip-clop, the rider was nearly on them. "Hello there," called Sam. The advancing hooves stopped short. They thought they could dimly guess a dark cloaked shape in the mist a yard or two ahead. "Now then," said Sam, "don't you come a step nearer. What do you want, and where are you going?" "I want Mr. Baggins. Have you seen him?" said a muffled voice. But the voice was the voice of Merry Brandybuck. A dark lantern was uncovered, and its light fell on the astonished face of Sam and Frodo and Pippin. "Mr. Merry!" they all cried. "Yes, of course. Who did you think it was?" said Merry, coming forward. As he came out of the mist and their fears subsided, he seemed suddenly to diminish to ordinary hobbit size. He was riding a pony, and a scarf was swathed around his neck and over his chin to keep out the fog. Frodo sprang forward. "So there you are at last," said Merry. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd turn up at all today, and I was just going back to supper. When it grew foggy, I came across and rode up towards Stock to see if you'd fallen in any ditches. But I'm blessed if I know which way you've come. Where on earth have you been?"